Everybody was coming through the door. I was like about to grab them, so I'm gonna hide them under here. Okay, so these are the 9 different topics we're gonna talk about in the term. After the first 5 topics or modules we're gonna have an midterm. We're gonna look at a lot of different development challenges. So again, this course is a hybrid of a course where you're gonna learn tools, impact evaluation tools, but you're also gonna learn substantive material and concepts and learn about theories relevant in economic development or development economics. There's gonna be a hybrid. Plus, since the illustrations of these tools and theories focus on Africa, you're gonna learn a lot, hopefully, about Africa-specific development challenges. So there's kind of this 3-pronged approach in the course. The first couple lectures, starting today, so we'll get to it, I think, starting another 15 minutes or so, will be a discussion of broad patterns of global development. What do we mean by underdevelopment? What does poverty look like? And how do development patterns in Africa compare to other regions if we take a snapshot today, or if we look over the last few decades? And both of those issues are important because there's been interesting dynamic issues. So that's what we're going to focus on today and Thursday. Then next week, we're going to take a step back in some sense and talk about theories of economic growth and the sorts of factors and inputs that economists tend to think are most important in generating economic growth and development. So we're going to go through a simple framework, mathematical model, and work through the solution of that model to try to illustrate why these different factors might be important. And again, then apply that model to a couple of the issues that are critical for African development over the last, say, 40 years. That's next week's goal, lectures 3 and 4. After that, we're going to get into a discussion of geography and the importance of geography in development with a particular application to health. There's been a lot of discussion among observers of African development about the importance of tropical disease in driving a number of important development outcomes in Africa. And a number of those tropical disease outcomes are importantly related to climate, to potentially climate change, to temperature, to how mountainous sub-Saharan Africa is, a lot of different factors that we could group together as geography. After that, we're going to talk about a very critical, specific health problem in sub-Saharan Africa, HIV/AIDS, and talk about the economics of HIV/AIDS. And it'll become clear when we get there what I mean by the economics of it. It's not just sort of the cost-benefit of different programs as much as the decision-making, the economic decision-making that people face in a society with high HIV prevalence. And finally, in lectures 13 through 16, we'll get to human capital, or education, and talk about the importance of schooling programs and skill upgrading in thinking about sub-Saharan Africa's economic transformation. So we're going to cover a lot of really classic topics in development economics. Health and education and nutrition is basically going to be in there as well. When we talk about health, education, and nutrition are really core topics in development economics. And once we get through the global patterns and the key conceptual frameworks in the first couple weeks, we're going to dive into those topics before the midterm. Let me pause for a second. Any questions or thoughts on the first half of the course, just in terms of the broad layout of topics? Okay, after the midterm, we're going to switch gears a bit. We're going to continue talking about core development issues, but instead of having this strong human resource, human capital focus, we're going to talk about a series of political economy and institutional issues, basically. We're going to talk about how institutions of various kinds, economic institutions, political institutions, social institutions, help people deal with economic shocks. Economic shocks are a critical issue for sub-Saharan Africa due to its weather patterns, due to its underdevelopment. Then we're going to turn to issues of corruption, culture, and development. Again, a critical, really political issue. And then get into issues of foreign aid and globalization. So discussions of foreign aid need not be political. They could be technical or purely technical, but in reality, they very often are political. And understanding how foreign aid interacts with local institutions, and also how foreign aid may be driven by institutions in the donor countries and politics in the donor countries is going to be important for us. So we're going to, in the second half of the course, have a bit of a broader perspective, political and institutional perspective on development in Africa. Whereas the first half of the course is going to be a bit more focused on specific programs and whether a particular approach works in health or education. Then finally, we're going to wrap up the course by focusing on certain success stories. We're going to have a discussion of mobile technology in Africa and how mobile technology is affecting how markets work, how the financial sector is organized, and increasingly how the public sector is organized in sub-Saharan Africa. And then talk about a couple of country cases that are particularly salient examples of African economic success stories. So we're going to sort of come full circle. We're going to start today and in the next lecture with how sub-Saharan Africa has lagged behind economically. But in the course of the term, we're going to try to figure out what works and what doesn't, and how those may build up and accumulate into successful development outcomes as well. Let me pause for a second and see if there's any comments or questions on the big kind of picture here. What are some of the topics that are missing? What are topics you all would have loved to have seen that are missing? Yep. Okay, financial institutions. Yep. Urbanization, migration, tightly interlinked issues. Yep. Yeah. Trade. Yeah, we'll have a little bit of trade. We are going to talk about aid, trade, and globalization, but it'll only be like one lecture. It won't be a kind of focus of a whole module, but it'll feature in part. But that's sort of maybe underrepresented. Yep. Okay, so microfinance linking to the finance point, but also innovative social programs like conditional cash transfers. Yeah. Say that again. The political environment. We are going to get to some of those issues when we talk about in the second half of the course, but maybe not as directly. Yeah. Yeah, so the natural environment, climate, water, I mean, there's a series of key issues. We're going to get to some of that when we talk about economic shocks and climate shocks, and there will be the better part of a couple lectures talking about issues related to the environment. But again, it's not going to be half the course, and it could be. We got a whole course on environment and development, but it's going to feature as one of several topics. Yeah. Yeah, IMF and the World Bank are going to feature a bit in this issue about foreign aid, trade, and globalization. So that one we are going to get to with a couple of lectures. Yeah, the issues of youth. We're going to, in a couple slides, talk about the demographic structure in sub-Saharan Africa and just how many young people there are, and that may pose its own unique challenges. Some of that is going to come out when we talk about education and health. We are going to be talking about investing in youth. So it's again something that we're going to get into a bit. gender is sort of one of the gaping holes. With this sort of syllabus, with the sort of broad set of topics, that the two comments people often raise is environment is missing as a sort of separate standalone module, and gender is missing as a separate standalone module. One of the things about gender is mainstreamed in the syllabus in the sense that when we talk about health, HIV, education, etc., we're going to come back again and again to the particular challenges facing women in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's no separate gender week, but gender is quite mainstreamed. Environment is partially mainstreamed in the sense we will come back to environmental issues in a couple of lectures, but it's clearly one where we could go to much more depth. Yeah. I would love to do one on environment in Asia. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, it's a great. I mean, there's no shortage of interest there or sort of real world policy importance. It does have this geographic focus on Africa, and we will get to environment at certain points, but it's not an environment and development class. It's going to be one of a series of topics. Certainly, health is going to be a big chunk of the course, but we will cover a lot of other topics. Yeah. Yeah, public policy is going to feature in here a lot, actually. So we're going to talk about public policies in relation to health and education and HIV and even anti-corruption policy. So policy is another thing that we're going to be dealing with a lot, in part because in a number of the papers, we're going to be very interested in evaluating the impact of very specific policies or programs. So policy is going to be weaved in throughout. Yeah, so we'll talk about different methods and approaches. We're not here, except for one or two cases where we will talk about how the impact evaluation may have translated into policy change. That link isn't going to be the focus, but in a couple of points, we will talk about that translation. So it will feature in a couple of the cases in the first half of the course mainly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's going to be weaved in throughout. We're going to talk about why a particular approach was chosen and why we might have wanted to choose approach A, but we couldn't, so we chose approach B or C. So that's something really one of the goals of the course is to have everybody by the end of the term feel comfortable enough with all these different methods that they would have a feel for how they should be used in different settings depending on the data, the design, etc. Okay. Yeah. Hold on. Hold on 10 minutes. We're going to get there. We're going to get there very soon. That's a great question. Yeah.
Will this class focus mostly on empirical methods, but also theoretical methods?
Mostly on empirical methods and applied econometric methods, but throughout there are going to be models, economic models, formal mathematical models we're going to bring in. We're going to talk about that next week with growth. We're going to talk about models of decision making when we talk about the economics of HIV/AIDS, etc. So there are going to be 3 or 4 points throughout the term, but we're going to sort of step back and talk about an economic conceptual framework that'll be useful in tackling a problem. But we're going to go into even greater depth on the empirical methods. So it's a mixture, but heavier on the empirical methods. Yeah. Which policy, sorry? Agriculture is actually going to feature when we talk about economic and climate shocks in rural households. We're going to have several lectures very much focused on agricultural decision making in rural households. So that's something that's going to come in that part of the term. But again, there isn't a separate agricultural section, and there very well could be. There could be a whole course on agriculture and development in sub-Saharan Africa. That would easily fill the semester, just like environment would, or it could be a combination of the two. But we will have several lectures on those topics. Yeah. There are. I don't know how many of them have a very specific regional or sectoral focus. I mean, I know there's a course in Haas that Paul Gertler teaches, but I don't think it has a regional or sectoral focus. Will Dow in the School of Public Health has a course. I think that focuses a bit more on health as well. So I think the regional focus of this impact evaluation course may be a little different than some of the other courses. All those courses, of course, by necessity, just for a limited semester, will focus on some sectors and not others. So those are Will Dow and Paul Gertler. There are 2 courses I know that are being offered maybe in this term. You can take all 3. Any other comments, questions on the setup? And then we're going to get to the why Africa question, which is a great question. You asked that exactly the time I asked you to, so thank you for setting me up like that. Yeah. Slightly more heavily weighted to the second half of the course, but it will be cumulative. Yep. Okay, let's keep going then. So what are some of the methods we're going to go through? I'm just going to quickly go through these now. We're obviously going to spend a lot of time throughout the course on them. I've divided what I'm calling methods, tools, or concepts into 2 groups. The top group are really applied econometric or empirical methods we're going to talk about in the course. The second group is more of a kind of hodgepodge of data issues and theoretical frameworks and economics, etc. But they are concepts we're going to go through and try to understand and apply. So if you look at that first list, again, everybody should know what OLS is. Again, if you don't know what OLS is, we have to talk and figure out if this course is the right course for you. But we're going to apply linear regression to a number of different empirical approaches that use different research designs. So one of them will be randomized experiments or randomized controlled trials, RCTs. That's something we're going to look at early on in the course, partially because the econometrics is is simplest and most natural, and there's a lot of RCTs have a lot of important properties in terms of unbiasedness that we're going to like. It also gives us a benchmark against which to compare some of the other methods. So we're going to start with randomized experiments. We're also going to discuss difference in differences analysis. Difference in differences approaches use what's called panel data or longitudinal data. In other words, having multiple observations on the same unit, as well as having multiple units. That's what panel data or longitudinal data is. And there's a series of approaches we can use if we have that kind of structure to our data. That's a difference in differences approach or design. The third method, or beyond OLS, that we're going to cover are going to be regression discontinuity designs. Discontinuity design is exactly what it sounds like, which is a research design where a very small change, say in one variable, let's say a test score that you get, leads to a very large and discontinuous treatment or exposure to a program or intervention. So imagine the case, and this is a stylized case, we're going to talk about a lot of applications of RD, but where I qualify for a scholarship if my SATs are greater than some level. So if I have they've rescored the SATs now. What is the right sort of scoring? Well, let's just say there's a test in a certain country. If I get a score above an 81, I get a scholarship to go to college. I get a free ride. But if I get an 80, I don't get a scholarship. That would be what we would call a regression discontinuity design. We're going to go into a lot of detail about how that works, but the idea is seemingly very similar people that got an 80 on a test or an 81 on a test, may get radically different exposure to a program. And we can compare those people with 80s and people with 81s to get a sense of the impact of the program. And then the last approach we're going to get into, really the second half of the term, once we set things up, are instrumental variable methods, which are almost certainly the most complicated econometrically of all the approaches I've listed. They typically require two-step estimation. There are more assumptions that go into instrumental variables approaches. That said, in the real world, when we're talking about real-world natural policy experiments and real-world data, instrumental variable approaches are often the approaches we need to go to. Several of these other approaches are not applicable. So they're very important. We're going to talk through a couple of cases of IV approaches as well. Yeah? Okay. Sounds good? Okay. Any comments or questions on those methods or approaches? Has anybody learned some of these different approaches in econometrics classes? Okay, good. If you've taken some statistics in econometrics, you should have been exposed to some of these approaches. I think what's going to be different, hopefully, about this class is we're going to go through a lot of them together. We're going to compare them. We're going to talk about how to use them, how to interpret the results, how they're similar, how they're different. So, what I often found as an undergrad, even in grad school, is you take an econometrics class, you study the properties of estimators. It's technical, you look at asymptotic properties of estimators, and it's important to get that foundation, but at the end of the term, you're not really sure how to use all the stuff you learned. And we kind of want to be the applied econometrics extension of those classes. So if you're comfortable with the basic statistics and econometrics, we're going to talk you through these approaches so you can actually use them. And in the problem sets, you're going to get data sets and you're going to use them. You're going to look at experimental data from RCTs, you're going to look at data with panel structure, you're going to look at data and use IV methods, etc. So you'll have some experience actually using these methods, and that could be useful. In terms of the second set of theories, concepts, etc., I already spoke about how we're going to talk about economic growth theory frameworks. We're going to talk about the issue of externalities or social effects and how that affects our analysis. The theory of public goods and the theory of externalities are really central to public economics and public finance. And so when thinking about public policy, we very often have to think carefully about the kinds of externalities that a certain individual decision will impose on others. So hopefully the kind of conceptual understanding of externalities will be applicable elsewhere. We'll talk about expected utility maximization. And in a number of the papers, we're going to talk about practical challenges of field data collection. What are the problems particular researchers have faced in collecting the data they want? Most of the sort of fiascos and problematic field data collection I'll bring in my own experiences, just because A, I know them, I suffered through them personally, and B, it's not to sort of tarnish other work. We'll talk about what I'm calling forensic data techniques in a couple of the papers. We'll talk about how you can creatively look at data to find how data has been manipulated or why there's been cheating, and there's some standard approaches to doing that. Again, that can be very important for understanding the implementation of real-world programs. And finally, we'll talk about the issue of pre-analysis plans. In the last 12 to 15 years, as we'll talk about in development economics, there's been an explosion in the use of experiments, RCTs, randomized trials. And now, basically following on medical research, where medical trials have been conducted for a long time. And now, again, following medical researchers, more and more social science researchers are getting interested in pre-analysis plans, basically specifying before they've even seen their data what analysis they would run to prevent them from data mining, basically getting out results that they like or that their donors or funders will like. So we'll talk about why this is important. And again, there's a very clear policy rationale for doing it. I'll talk about a project that we carry out in Sierra Leone where the funder, our funder of our research, actually, honestly, really wanted answer A. And we weren't giving them answer A because the data didn't say the answer was A. The data said the answer was there was no effect of this program. And having a pre-analysis plan in place actually protected us in some sense because we said, hey, we all agree this is the analysis we were going to do. Don't pressure us to modify what we're doing. So again, just getting back to this very important point about real-world use of these tools, the second half of this list is going to talk about a lot of things that I think will be useful for people that may want to apply these methods in reality. And going through the cases in detail will bring out these points. Let me pause again for a second. Okay. So what I want to do at this point, we're actually going to start transitioning to more content. But before we get into the global comparisons of development, I want everybody to look at that other handout you got, not the syllabus, but the other handout. And I'm going to put some of the text on the screen in a second for people that don't have a copy. Throughout the course of the term, we are going to talk about real-world problems and real people's issues, but a lot of the time we're going to be talking about econometrics and estimators and how to understand programs. And one of the goals of today's lecture, really the next 5 minutes, is to just step back for a second and try to think about, in a very concrete way, what life is like living on $1 a day. So I'll show you a graph in a few slides about the share of sub-Saharan Africans living on $1 a day. $1 a day poverty is about 40%. $1 a day poverty is really extreme. And what I want people to do is look at that handout. We're going to take just maybe 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and I want you to read through just a page and a half, 12-point font. It'll take you a couple minutes. It's a story of a woman living in rural Eritrea and her just normal day. So it's also here. Oops, I jumped ahead a little bit, but I'll come back. Here it is. So if you don't have it in front of you and you can make it out on the screen, there it is. It's up here. Should I go to the next page? Okay. Sorry? Which I thought I got on with it. There's a third slide coming with the last two from that page.